Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Proving Grounds Pod, your one-stop shop for all things Proving Grounds. My name is Max, and I'm joined by my constant co-host Cubby. And today, everyone, we have a very special guest with us. You know her, you love her. It's Emily Rand, current member of the LCS broadcast team on the Analyst Desk. Emily, how are you today?
I'm good. Like I said, I've been grinding some TFT and League of Legends. Now I actually have time to do so, which is fun. Because our season ended, so it was like this very weird. It's always really weird when things end very abruptly, and then you're like, "Oh, what am I going to do now?" So other than watching LCK regionals and then LPL finals tonight, I've just been chilling. It's been weird. Not a fan, but you know.
Well, if you're a fan of Chovy, you have been a fan of the results of the regional gauntlet run for sure. But yeah, no, it's like season ending. Like it does feel so abrupt because like for the last 12 weeks, it has been all things LCS, and this concludes your first year of being a participating member, like on the desk and on the show. So, what has that been like for you? Yeah, first off, congrats. But second off,
I made it.
Yeah.
It's been a lot better than I thought it was going to be. I've told people this before, but I thought I was going to be really, really bad. And I ended up at about like mediocre, I think, compared to where I want to be, which is a lot better than I am now. But the feedback and positivity around my appearance was something I actually definitely did not anticipate. Like after I made those signs as like kind of a joke, it was going to be like a broadcast bit, and our producer was like, I don't know how we're going to fit this in. And I was like, okay, whatever. I'll just make signs for every player anyway, because like it sucks if they don't have to, they don't have an audience because we had to, not do New Jersey. And when that popped off, the way I found out was my friend was like, oh, you have a top 2 thread on Reddit. And I was like, oh no, it's my time. Like, oh no, here it comes, here it comes. Like Emily Rand's fucking trash. But yeah, I have really appreciated how people have received me. I think I can do a lot better, honestly. I have a really hard time condensing stuff down to it being really concise, especially when talking about stuff like if I actually want to get in depth in terms of jungle pathing or wave management and stuff like that, you kind of have to fudge it to the point where you're fitting it into these like really, really small windows of broadcast, because we only have about anywhere between like 3.5 to 7 minutes in between games. And sometimes in a best of 1 season, there'll be, pre-show prepped for the next set as opposed to, post-show analysis. Mm-hmm. So balancing that has been incredibly difficult for me, because even when I was writing, I always had like worked with, I would typically at ESPN anyway be working with an editor and either fighting to keep things or like being like, you need to pare this down, make it more concise. And it was a lot easier to do that than on broadcast. So that was definitely the most difficult thing for me, especially since I don't know how you guys talk. I've listened to both of you speak on being a broadcaster and the difficulties of that and the like awesomeness of being on broadcast as well. But when I talk about a play, I suddenly start seeing it, especially if it's in front of me, and I can see so many different things, and I always want to add like more and more and more context, and you just don't fucking have time.
Yeah.
So that's been the most difficult thing for me, honestly. Like especially again with stuff like wave management and like synchronizing waves and talking about how a jungler actually interacts with lanes and how laning works and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, you are talking to 2 people who ramble so much on cast and on desk that they decided to make this show. So you're in the right company for that, I'd say. I definitely understand that. The wanting to say more and more and more and more and more about like plays that are going on is definitely like it's super, super hard to make that like really like digestible, I think. Mm-hmm. But I've really enjoyed the way that you've approached it, because I think as you said, like getting into it is really tough, and I think when it was remote as well, it was even harder to do, because I remember a lot of times when you guys were like just starting out in the spring and it was all remote, and it was really hard to like it was I'm sure it was really hard for you guys to divvy up the points and everything.
Probably had like a lot of
Mhm.
limitations, like how production could support your points as well, being remote.
Yeah.
Yeah, because like on broadcast you can just signal to someone, and like
Yep.
no
Exactly.
one cares they're watching if they see you do this or if they see you like tap on the desk or something. But remote you can't just be like.
Yeah.
So we had a period system, but there's always a delay
Right.
because you're on a relay broadcast. So
That's like interesting to hear about, like kind of the trouble condensing it. I know that's something like you've actually spoken pretty publicly about, and like I know that you plan on writing something, but is definitely the difficulties of storytelling in the LCS and like making sure that you also have the time to like fit those in. If you like had to give like a brief like synopsis or like kind of like one or two like headlining points for that, like what were some of the difficulties that like you ran into like in your first year with trying to be an effective storyteller like on the broadcast, and like what some of the difficulties like you felt were for like trying to accomplish that?
So going into it, I think I have, despite not being as well connected as you two, I think I have a pretty good understanding of the North American ecosystem, despite the fact that it's actually rarely been my focus in writing. Obviously, I've done a lot of like video interviews for ESPN previously with the LCS players, but it's never really been my primary like written focus. I know for a fact that there's still like a massive problem with scouting and with community perception of players, and a broadcast can really hinder a player's career. So I said this actually on the first episode of Next Level that I was on, where I was like, that's the thing that I'm the most worried about, is that I will say something that is incorrect and adversely affect a player's career without meaning to do so. Because it's actually really easy to do. Not because, I mean, I think I'm a pretty critical person just generally. But if you say something wrong, or if you present information in a way that really makes people look very poorly on that player, it is really difficult to then try to like tell their story. So that's one thing that I always thought of when I was going into storytelling, especially when we came back to studio. One of my big pushes was to get players on the desk, because you can do a lot of extra storytelling if you literally just are able to sit down with a player for like 5 minutes and be able to see them as a human and not as this pile of statistics, or you know, that person that did this Lee Sin player, this Tristana player, whatever. Even if it's a positive thing, it's always nice getting to know people as people. And I think that was a huge part, kind of a shortcut, because again, you have such a limited amount of time. If you can at least see someone's personality and even get them to open up about one question, like for example, Sven opening up about how much it meant for him to make Worlds. I thought that Huhi's interview after the 100 Thieves win this past weekend was really good in that regard as well. And I think that is the other challenge of broadcast, is just really trying to find ways to make players people, especially with having to go up against co-streaming, where all they're going to be doing is looking at like really specific analytical points, or really specific individual plays that players make that you know are a lot of the time going to be mistakes, because you know, like we see it, I see it, they see it, like players are just going to make mistakes. And so pointing those out while also being able to tell a player narrative or talk about what they're actually good at and present everything that player is incredibly challenging. I definitely don't think we did like a great job, but I do think we improved a lot as the season went on. And I know for a fact that the LCS producers that I worked with were always like really willing to listen to me and other people when we did talk about like what we wanted to do for player narratives. So like honestly, credit to them. Like I tweeted this the other day, but like any success I've had is like a lot of credit to them as well.
Yeah, the production's always like the heroes that don't get the credit, right? Like behind the camera. That's really interesting to hear though, because like I think that like what you're citing is something like I've oftentimes credited, like coming from me being a big traditional sports fan, like a huge Cubs and Bears fan, and like watching golf. Like there is that social barrier that is created like with the game, because you aren't seeing like the players all the time, right? Like they are playing champions, so, like you are watching the map. And so I think it is like really easy to kind of like lose that human element. And it is a challenge that, like I think every esports production like has to figure out, like how do we incorporate this, right? Like I think the classic answer is like always, you know, the OGN face cams, right? Like everyone remembers like Ryu's reaction to like the faker play, right? But it's been fun like seeing like more ways to like problem solve that, or like I know like the fishbowl questions. I think those are kind of fun, like the icebreakers. And like figuring out, like seeing not only like the approach that like the LCS took, but also like the approach that different leagues took, like also other games take as well, because that is a big problem to solve, like in gaming, like as a whole.
Yeah, I think the LPL does a really good job with their shoulder content. But yeah, go. Sorry.
I was just gonna say I think that this split has been like a really big step in the right direction for LCS, with like all of the surrounding content around it. Like even like Masterminds does a good job of that. I've really enjoyed that like content piece, and like the next level shows are all been phenomenal. But the thing that like strikes out to me the most has actually been like the losers interviews that have been done live recently. What are your thoughts on just like the impact of that implementation specifically for like playoffs around this split?
So first of all, credit to La Tigris and Dash, especially Gabby, who's been doing most of those loser interviews. It's always really difficult to interview a losing team, especially you can see that coming out of some of the press conferences there were recently, where, you know, there were a few like definite like miscues with teams. I think that it is really difficult for player, like if I'm a player, I definitely don't want to do that. So also credit to them and their orgs for being able to open up about that, because I think again that was something that we did push for, just to be like, this might be their last chance to, you know, say goodbye to the audience or put a cap to their season. And you know, even though they lost, it's a nice stage. But honestly, like all the credit belongs to the players themselves for doing it, and then additionally the interviewers, because as someone who's had to do losers interviews, it's really difficult, and you want to be able to have a good rapport with that person, and you need to be able to prep your questions in advance to make sure that you're asking the things that you need to get answers for without coming across as any sort of like accusatory, or like, you know, like, gee, aren't you sad? Like, sucks that you're not going to continue, you know? So.
We had to do one with Iconic with League Day, and I was on that one, and I usually don't struggle, like, doing interviews, but I definitely, like, I'd, like, double-check, like, afterwards, like, hey, like, was that all right? Because it's tough, right? Like, their season's over, and, like, even for a team like Golden Guardians, like, they made a lot of really nice strides, like, for this season. No one was really expecting them to like contend for Worlds, but it still sucks like getting knocked out, right?
Yeah.
I just really enjoyed that, like as a spectator, as someone who's really into like the stories of the players, as he said, and I think this split has done a great job of that. But that's something that like you specifically have been doing for a very long time, like talking about the stories of players, and as you said, you've done a lot of interviews in the past. For people who may be listening and don't know, how much history actually goes into your background in that?
LPL, baby. Here we go.
In interviews, well, so people might not know this, but I went to school for journalism, actually, not broadcast but print, because you had to. So in our program, you had to separate at some point, and it was like, okay, are you going to do broadcast stuff, or are you going to write for the paper? Because you you just branch out in two paths, right? So with one, you're doing more broadcasty things when you get into your more practical classes, and then in the other, you're working for the paper. So I was a writer, and then I was a staff editor and stuff. So it's actually really funny because the last official broadcast work, outside of a few things I did for ESPN, like we streamed a lot, but like in terms of a broadcast, I didn't really do a lot, was a project I did in college on like reporting from Smuggler's Notch ski resort on like snowfall or something. But in terms of League of Legends, I started playing back in 2012, and I was really bad. And so my friends told me to watch streams. So I actually ended up watching NetNuen's stream more than anyone else's, but I also watched regional finals that year and Worlds, and then I got into watching LCS casually in season 3. But I didn't decide to really start writing or doing anything with League of Legends until I saw KT Roaster Bullets at MLG Dallas. And one of my friends had been like, you need to see this team because they're so much better than every other team in the world, and they're doing this exhibition, and like just watch the stream. And I was like, okay. And they had a like, I guess they called it like an exhibition match against Gambit, who had just become Gambit, previously Moscow 5. And I was like, oh my God, this team is so good. Like, they're doing things that I've never seen other teams do before. That's really insane. And so then I became an avid OGN watcher. And the whole reason I actually started watching LPL was because I was a KT Rolster fan, and Insec and Zero went to Starhorn Royal Club. So I started watching them in 2014. And then was it 2014? It was 2014, right? Yeah. And then 2015, post Exodus, Frost Guerin was going to Australia to cast LPL. And so she was like, I want you to be on China Talk. And I was like, good Lord, why? And the crew basically said, they were like, all of these Korean players that were coming over to China at the time. And I was like, well, yeah, I guess that's true. So I started watching LPL. It took me, I've written about this before, but like it took me a really long time to wrap my head around like what LPL teams are doing, because you kind of have to like break your brain and unlearn a lot of things that you have learned about the game and restructure it and figure out, like, instead of coming from a top-down perspective and being like, I only watch Korea and Korea is the best region in the world, and what the F are these LPL teams doing? I don't understand. This is just bad. Actually looking at like how they team fight and what they did do on the map took a lot for me to learn. And then, I guess I've been like, most people know me as an LPL person at this point, because that was like a huge focus league of mine from 2015 on, that I actually started in OGN Champions in terms of like writing about things.
Yeah. I will never forget the Insec best of 5 at Season 4 Worlds, where he picked Pantheon and Fiddlesticks, I think, like in the last like, 2 games to win. I forget which team it was over, but it was to go to the finals. Like, they lost to White. But yeah, that was crazy times. Because no one played Fiddlesticks back then. And then he just whips it out, like, games 4 and 5. But yeah, that was always a lot of fun. It's interesting, like, hearing you go from, like, Korea and China, like, also, like, having to unlearn things. Because it feels like now, like, watching North American League of Legends versus LPL League of Legends, a lot of different decisions are made in the early game, and also like how sides are played around objectives. And unlearning some things is actually a requirement for like transitioning like to this region. So I guess as someone like who has always kind of watched or covered like multiple regions, like what is like the appeal to you of like how regions like form like their different identities? Like what do you find like interesting from that? And like what are like some like the pros and cons as we kind of prep heading into Worlds?
I mean, I always just thought it was interesting in general. Like, one thing I left out of my huge getting into it thing was that in 2014, when I was writing for GG Chronicle, one of the teams that no one had picked up to write about was Kaboom, and we were doing these like really long, like 3,000 word previews of teams, and I was like, I have a friend who's Brazilian, and I can have him translate stuff for me. So I was like, Andre, can you please translate like all of these interviews for me? And then I watched the games, and I noticed based on their play style, a lot of stuff had happened in Brazil that year. Basically, two specific Korean imports had come and kind of like retaught a lot of the region's junglers how to actually jungle and communicate with their lanes a lot better, and you know, just like really basic pathing stuff that in 2014 seemed like a revelation. And a Brazilian fan after this came out, because people are like, oh, like there's actually like effort. I just expected someone to just like, you know, write like blah 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 blah. These are the players, these are their names, etc. They like went in depth with their play style and where they came from, and how I was actually surprised that they won Brazil, because they were all Brazilian team. And someone asked me, based on play style, who will they beat in this group? And I was like, well, they're probably not going to beat anyone, even in a best of one. Like, I'm sorry. But then I was like, if I have to look at it based on play style, and then I like went down with percentages, and the highest percentage I gave them was against Alliance. And I was like, and here's why. And then that was like a huge shock that year. So I always think, especially with like, obviously the playing field has leveled a lot, right? So everything, even though you still have the best teams are up here and the worst teams are down here, I feel like it's become a lot closer than it used to be, where you didn't even necessarily have to do analysis. You pretty much knew that South Korean teams were ahead of everyone. And so you could just look at their play styles and be like, okay, which South Korean team has the best play style for this meta, or just which South Korean team has the best players. And it's not like that anymore now, which I think makes it so much more interesting.
Oh, yeah.
Because like last year, Damwon were like unequivocally the best team in the meta at that tournament, and you can point to really specific examples of why, but then you can also point to like the top esports Fnatic series and be like, wow, this was like an insane meta for Fnatic. And if they'd maybe figured it out a little bit sooner, like they could have easily knocked off top esports, because this is actually a really terrible meta for them. And the only way that they adjusted was going back to a play style that they really liked, with Karsa, you know, influencing his lanes a lot more quickly on something like a Lee Sin, which was not really in vogue at the time for the past Worlds. So I always think it's really, really interesting, especially since if you look at all of the top teams now across all major regions that are going to Worlds thus far, I think it's really cool that even the teams within the same region have a variety of different playstyles within that region itself. And then obviously different playstyles versus other teams that are going to Worlds.
I will never forget the Eve Jhin combo that Fnatic was running against. That was so ridiculous how Eve would just pop out of the fog, press Q, an instant W, and you died. Like, it was so filthy. That was really fun.
Speaking of the teams that are going to Worlds, we have ours locked in for LCS. The finals are over. What is your impression of these teams that you've covered all throughout the year?
How much hopium?
Yeah, give us the hopium.
So I said this in another podcast that I do weekly, but I think that there's a distinct possibility that we could be sending teams that are actually pretty competitive. At the same time, none of them will make it out of groups. And that's not a reflection of that we're not sending teams that aren't competitive, but that everything is going to be so competitive coming out of other regions. Specifically, having to have 4 Chinese teams and 4 South Korean teams across the board. This year's play-ins are going to be so tough. Like, I cannot imagine having to come up against like an SK Telecom or even Hanwha, who I did not expect to be here. I actually expected to be Nongshim.
Yep.
But like, I can't imagine what it's like to have to go up against like you know, Chovy or Faker in your first game as a minor region team in play-ins, because that's just really, really tough. And then whoever is coming out of China, it's either going to be one of RNGWE, because they play each other. One of them qualifies as the 3rd seed, and then There's LNG and Rare Atom. Like, I can't imagine having to wrap your brain around Rare Atom and prepping for that team going into like a play-in group. So, and that's just play-ins. So everything is incredibly tough. That being said, I think the cool thing about the 3 North American teams that I can say this year that I feel like I haven't been able to say in a while is that they, again, have very distinct ways of looking at the game, which I think is always a positive, because the team that always wins Worlds is going to be the team that's best suits that meta and figures it out first. And it's not always the top team from even that team's region. So
I think that's like something that I actually credited a lot of like 200 Thieves, and the reason that they won is that I think the read of the top lane meta was very distinctly different from the rest of the tournament, and actually ended up paying off like really well. I think Someday was like actually an unsung hero in that tournament. Like, he was picking Ornn blind and going even in lanes, like as Ornn, and then just leaning into the fact that that team fights really well. Like, when they picked up FBI, they're like, we wanted the best team fighting AD in the league, and we feel like we have him in FBI. And the depth on top of that, and like him and Closer just having a couple days of like the best play I've ever seen from them. I think that it actually panned out really well for the Thieves, like on their title run.
I wonder if that was what's going on with the EG priority on set. Maybe they were scrimming against 100 Thieves. These guys are blind picking Ornn. We should pick set into it. Maybe that's what's going on in Impact's head. I'm still baffled by that pick, trying to find some reason for it.
You don't like the set pick?
I just think it came out of nowhere. I don't really know what led them to that conclusion. I would love to pick their brains about it, because I just think it's really
You'll
quirky.
See more stuff like that at Worlds.
Oh yeah.
I think the big thing that I'm really glad.
Blind Mundo. Here we go. Anyway.
He probably will.
He already has
he'll probably probably pick Riven blind or something. He's insane. I really hope WE make it, actually. But of the things that I saw 100 Thieves do that I really liked, the first time they met TL, they knew that Closer could go head-to-head with Santorin, and he's actually the only jungler who's been able to track Santorin as well, to the point where he is not as effective. And a lot of their like shift from regular season to postseason has obviously been around Santorin, and more specifically how he can control their early game. But the thing I'm really glad they punished, speaking of the way that teams are playing topside, is you cannot go top. You cannot sack your 2v2 as much as TL were doing without being punished against like an LPL team, for example, right? Because they'll just dive the shit out of you. And that is what 100 Thieves did. Like, I remember talking to Huki about it, and I was like, thank you for exploiting this. Not because I think topside roams are bad, but because there should always be a cross-map trade. So if you're constantly sending your support topside and they're constantly roaming and they're down in levels from this, you should be able to just dive the shit out of the opposing AD carry, especially with like comparatively over-leveled support. And that's something that I saw 100 Thieves do that I really, really appreciated, because I think it's good that TL get punished for that now, and now have to think about how they mitigate that going into the World Championship.
I think it's a great way of thinking about it too. Just like having a bunch of teams in your league that are all trying different things and like challenging each other is so valuable. Because if you're all just doing the same thing, then you're all just going to get tunneled on doing like one strategy. And like I think that's really valuable. And it might very well lead to exactly what you're saying, where the NA teams are actually all distinctly competitive this time. I'm curious what you think is fingers crossed. I'm curious what you think is the distinction that Cloud9 are going to make as our historically strongest NA team at Worlds.
I mean, they have the ramp up time at least, right? But again, like
playing buff.
The big thing about this year's play-ins is that they're actually a lot tougher. And I think one of the reasons why people kept rating C9 so highly, myself included, was that you know what this group of players are capable of in your head. And even when they're not performing to that level, you think like there has to be a world where they figure it out, right? Like there just has to be. Like perks playoff buff memes aside, like I'm not even talking about that. I'm just talking about a group of players who have hands, who should be able to figure out some way to play in this meta. But then when I saw them go up against 100 Thieves, I thought there was just a lot of stuff that they were missing. I think it was especially in game 1, if I remember correctly, that I thought they could have like really, really punished 100 Thieves composition. Let me look it up, actually. I'm pretty sure it was game 1. But I think
I think that's where they had Ori, Varus, and the Rise, right?
Yes, they definitely have Rise. It was, but yeah, like I think they have the toughest road, because I think TL should be able to very easily regroup. Like we've already seen them do it from that awful best of 1 they had against C9 at the end of the season, and then the next week they come out with the Ziggs looks and more early game looks and the Trundle pick, which didn't even work out in that series because that draft was really bad, but it was obviously something that they prepped and went on to do really well with, right?
Drew
so
2 bans.
I think I think that TL will be fine. But with C9, because it's been so hard to pinpoint, and I mean they themselves have said this, like it's been so hard to pinpoint like the nebulous, like why are we not working as well as we should. Yeah, it was with Xinjiao and Rise versus the Ori, and then someday picked Ornn, and then Aphelios Braum bot. So yeah, I thought they could have punished that that mid jungle a lot more, or gone bot side in that with Blabber, just because Sin is such an insanely strong champion. But again, like credit to Closer, who was just an absolute beast this entire series. He was able to outmatch any jungler he went up against. So.
I know that specifically for that series too. Like game 4, that draft was actually like, I thought they had a pretty big blunder in drafts, in my opinion, where they could have gotten Ori Varus into Rise, which I think is a really good answer into Rise at the moment because of all the zone control you can bring against him in team fights. You can't answer sides against him, but you can poke him out and like prevent him from like ever getting involved. And instead they gave away the Varus, so like you had this Rise Varus combo where you're gonna have prio like in all 3 lanes for the Thieves, like because then they could have gotten counterpick top, which they used for the Camille. So like that's like also a draft where like I wasn't used to seeing mistakes from C9 like draft throughout even the summer. Like I think like they made some mistakes, but I think for me that was like actually one of the biggest points of power for C9 in the spring, is that I thought for the lock-in tournament and for the majority of spring, C9 were actually ahead of the meta a lot of the times, like what picks were good and not. And I think that this meta, like your read about who's best on the patch, I think is very true. I think that they had a different read in the patch than I thought, and I thought that 100 Thieves had a really good read in the patch.
Yeah. One of the only Vayne into Ziggs picks that I've liked.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, we've definitely done the show's namesake slightly dirty by talking about LCS.
Sorry.
Only. No, it's not your fault. We've intentionally steered the conversation this way.
It's Worlds time,
Yeah, exactly. I'm super pumped for Worlds. I would like to take this time to steer over to the developmental side of North America, though, because we do have Proving Grounds coming up at the time we're recording this tomorrow. If you're listening to this as we release it, probably today is more realistic. That's starting up. We have all the teams playing in the first round for this week, and I know you are someone who was on the broadcast for Proving Grounds in the spring, and I know you've been loosely keeping up with it as well. I don't want to speak for all of that, but do you have any like blanket impressions about the start of that with all the teams that are in it?
I mean, honestly, I haven't. So this is why I was so surprised that you wanted to be here. I haven't had a ton of time to catch up. The main thing I was worried, like quote unquote worried about, I guess, which you guys covered in your previous episode was whether the Worlds teams would have to take away from their academy teams or their amateur teams and kind of like bump it up. But as far as I know, unless you guys have information that I don't, the only one that we've seen is 100 Thieves, right?
Yep.
Okay.
That's
so
it,
that's interesting.
It's surprising because that's different than what I heard beforehand, which it makes me So, but at least for Proving Grounds, like one of the big concerns was Team Liquid, of course, who were coming off of being the victors of Academy, not being at full strength. They have great subs in Doko and Nori, but looks like they're not. They're gonna have Jenkins and Armeo, who would be the two people you'd expect to sub for that team because they played throughout the season, right?
And they've already got backups set.
Yeah.
So it would make a lot of sense.
So yeah, they're playing at full strength, and I guess we gotta. Well, we can throw around some ideas, but I know that since TL are at full strength, they have to come in as the favorites, as the 1 seed in the Academy Victors, because that team, like Jenkins and Armeo, I mean, you saw them, Emily, perform in the LCS stage. They held their own, right? They're not Alfari, they're not Santorin, but they did get Team Liquid some wins, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's so unfair to Jenkins specifically because he played so well, and it was so frustrating to have to couch everything with like, I'm sorry, you're being compared to the best laning top that North America has ever seen, like in Alfari, because it's such an unfair comparison from the get-go, and he was playing so fucking well in LCS actually that it was really, really frustrating to try to like work around that when you're talking about him, right? Because you have to basically like actually yourself while you're speaking.
He was the only top laner in the league, and TL were doing this for like the first 6 weeks of. They were letting through the super OP Gwen, and he had good answers into it. Like his GP, his Akali, his Camille, they were neutralizing that pick consistently. And no one else in the league was doing that. Like it was either Gwen B1 or ban, right? And that opened up a lot of things for TL. So like not only was he playing well, he was doing it into the probably unanimously most OP pick on like the few patches that he was playing on, which I think is a huge credit to him as well. Especially given the fact that the biggest knock on Jenkins in the past has been, he's got his own champion pool, right? But he used his own champion pool really effectively for that patch.
Yeah, I think he being on TLA alongside Armeo just instantly makes them the favorite. I was already pretty faithful that they would turn some heads even without them, but the fact that they're here is just like, it's so OP. Those guys are gonna just stomp everyone, I feel. But yeah, we've seen over this year that I mean we had a crazy upset in the finals for spring. The amateur team, No Org, took the whole thing. And I'd say for this time, Wildcard Red is the team that if an amateur team is going to do it, it's going to be them.
With an old LCK champion.
Yeah, they literally have Arrow on the squad. Some other names that people would know. Brandini is the top laner. They have got Winston, who, if you're an Academy fan, was previously the TSM Academy jungler when they took second. And they've got some really strong rookies in Bradley and Daption.
You'll know Bradley's name by the end of the tournament if you turn the Proving Grounds. Yeah. Absolutely. Have you gotten a chance to watch Bradley, Emily?
No. Yeah, he was when I was prepping for the last Proving Grounds event I was on. He was like, people kept giving him Gwen, and it's just like, why? Why are you doing this? Because like not only was she OP and something that hadn't made its way into like other competitions, but Bradley just knew that champion so well that like you're just like, why are you doing this? Like just ban it. And I feel like there's a lot of times when that happens in draft because you think you can deal with someone's like strongest pick, or you might not think it's like that good, and like no, just like 99% of the time, just ban it.
I will say, my collegiate team did have to play Bradley's collegiate team, and I had the draft against him, and we did that through the Glen because we thought we could play Jax into it, and we were wrong. He is really good. So yeah, there's a little bit of first-hand experience there too, but it's funny you bring up Gwen because obviously that was a pick that he was really well known for. But the thing that's impressed us about Bradley is the fact that he went from being this exclusive, unreal melee assassin player, quite frankly, in the mid lane, to actually proving that he can sometimes play mages, which he still is not the strongest on, but has gotten to the point where like he's good enough on mages to like get by. And that was an issue for Bradley beforehand. And when you throw that on top of like his pop-off performances when he does go off, like he is I think unanimously like the player that doesn't have any pro experience or pro or academy or LCS experience under his belt that people should look out for in this tournament.
Yeah. He's very good. I mean, it helps that they haven't lost anything yet, but I mean that's gonna help any player for like stats and everything. But he passes the eye test with flying colors too. I think this team actually does have a shot, even considering Team Liquid and Cloud9 are playing at full strength, at winning again. I mean, Norg did it against Cloud9. They did beat Team Liquid, if I'm remembering correctly, in the first round. Did they not, Cubby?
No, it was Barrage that beat him.
Oh, that was Barrage.
Yeah.
I'm thinking of something else. But yeah, I mean, Team Liquid did go 0-4, so they didn't get the chance to play very many teams. But Norg, yeah, because they were in the same bracket. I'm remembering now. Okay. Anyway, I'm pretty excited about Wildcard Red. I don't know if you had a stronger impression on them compared to like the other teams, because I know the amateur teams have had like pretty sparing games. I know for a team like Cloud9 Amateur, they got in off of a finals appearance because Wildcard Red won everything, and then we haven't seen them in like a really long time. So I wasn't sure. Like, a team like that is really hard to talk about. But
yeah, I'm actually kind of curious, Emily. Like, I know that you've like been like doing some prep or like checking out like some of the teams a little bit. Like, are there like any other like teams or players like have really stuck out to you that like you've seen so far?
Wildcard Red was the one that I was like, okay. I do think 100 amateur are going to go down in my estimation, just because of the reasons we already talked about with them having to do a roster shuffle.
yeah.
I think trying to think. This is where I was going to rely on you guys to tell me about it, because I'm just
it's
like,
all good.
I feel like my prep has not been good because I haven't had time.
It's
I'm trying to remember if there was anyone who was like super impressive in academy to me. I was really surprised that C9A made it to finals, not because of the talent on
They played
the
some
team
close
or like
best of
lack
fives.
thereof, but
Yeah.
like
Really
I was
did.
just like, I did not think you were going to make it. And then I mean, in terms of like teams that I'm just kind of rooting for, I really loved watching because I try to watch as much academy as I can in season,
Yeah,
along with watching every major region because I'm a moron.
that's crazy.
Who just doesn't like sleep.
Yeah.
But I think that I was really, really happy to see how, I don't even know if like Well would cover it, but like I really enjoyed seeing the FlyQuest Academy team in
Yes.
the
Mhm.
LCS, because even though it was very obvious that they weren't as good as strong like laners, and they just weren't up to LCS caliber competition as a team, one thing I really appreciate about them is they have insane communication for like an academy team. These players, they would pull off stuff that like shouldn't get away with, but B like requires like such insane precise communication. So whoever is making those calls, like I remember one really specific one in Botside River where Triple is TPing back in as LeBlanc, and they already lost the fight. It's just something that shouldn't like fucking work, but they managed to end up collapsing on their opponent. I don't remember who it was, but I can like see the play.
He was
in my
C9
mind.
because I remember like a Jhin being in that game.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I was just like, damn, like this team really goes for it. And I always appreciate that, because I feel like with LCS teams, especially when they're losing a game, they tend to like turtle and not do anything and wait for their opponents to make a mistake so they can capitalize on. But FlyQuest Academy have much more of a like LPL mindset where they're just like, okay, go next. Like we might as well try this shit because we're gonna lose the game anyway. Yeah. Like, and that fight they won that everyone keeps bringing up on the top side of the map against TSM for that like insane comeback. Like that's another one of those things where it's just like that's a 10% to 90% play that you're just flipping on because it's the only thing you can do rather than losing slowly. And like I'll always appreciate a team that's like that. I will say academy and amateur teams are a lot more likely to be that way in general, which is another reason why I really like watching them. I also think that they have a better read or more better / more experimental read on the meta a lot of the time. But yeah, for FlyQuest Academy, I can't help but root for them because I really, really enjoyed watching them in LCS.
The experimental like meta stuff is always interesting because you can see when a team like has been scrimming against their LCS counterpart and they're like, we think this counterpick could be maybe good, and like that sort of thing has been very, very prevalent throughout this year, in my opinion. Like
I do credit Tomo for bringing more Jhin play into LCS.
Yeah,
like
that's a good example. The Jenkins like counterpicks into Gwen are a really good example. There haven't been a lot of like good things to say about CLG, but Tien actually was a really good example of that too. He was playing some crazy champions, and I mean you could see that reflected sometimes in the CLG.
Louis and the TK.
Too. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
some really interesting things, and also Alo was like the first person in the world to make Rel look good in spring. So there's some like really crazy stuff that happened in Academy that just makes it super, super fun.
Well, Emily,
to watch for a long time.
Yeah, and I know that going into Proving Grounds, Emily, you love junglers, and I do have a treat for you. I actually think there are a lot of good junglers in this tournament. And one's like definitely to look out for us. Tomio on EG, who you would have seen in that EG C9 series.
Yep.
Instantly for me, we expected this. We had Tomio ranked like very highly on the list that we do with Tim throughout the entire season. For me, instantly top 5 jungler in this tournament, even though like he's like on a new team. Like that's just kind of this individual skill level that Tomio brings to the table. It's been like him and Jojo Pion as a 17 and 16-year-old duo is really exciting for EG. And I've got a treat for you. If you like teams that don't give up when they fall behind, that's EG. As I'm sure you know.
Yeah.
So that's fun. And then also this recent tournament, Dignitas won. Now, this didn't include the top 10 teams that are in the tournament between amateur and academy. But the fashion they did it in was Will, the 16-year-old jungler that they plug and played after Kaden got bumped up, actually had a very good tournament. And guess what? They're on the same, or no, they are not on the same side of the bracket. But I think, like, between that, like, you think of, like, the junglers that are representing amateur, like, between RBM. Chad Jungle would have been one, but he's going to play on 100 Academy, and he's actually one to look out for, too, because he's very young, fresh, mechanically talented. Fnatic is another jungler for Resolve that I think is really close to, like, deserving an Academy spot and is very talented as well. The jungle pool is actually kind of stacked for this tournament, Smash.
Yeah, even like Winston too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Unfortunately, we lost one of the strongest ones in Kenvi, so unlucky there. But
Chad jungle stand, it's fine.
Dude, I am a Chad jungle stand.
I know you are.
Absolutely, I am. I'm very excited for that. So also they're picking Panda to step in for 100 next. Panda's actually not bad. He played on one of the teams in the Unified tournament.
Oh, he was on a wild card for the last Proving Grounds. That's
the
best example, yeah.
But
plus I followed him at Scouting Grounds.
Yeah.
But
like all the way back in the day.
He actually did perform well on the like 16th seeded team in that tournament. Like they did win a series and they
beat TSM in both early games.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So
nice.
And a lot of that was because of Panda. So I think that counting that team out is not a good idea, although they are against wildcard first. So
it's
maybe
kind of
in that matchup it's going to be okay.
Honorary mention though to Dinka, who legitimately is an insane laning top laner. Like he's really good at laning, but
he's stepping in for 100 next as well.
Yeah,
big roster swap player. But Yeah, I think that is a nice preview for it. I wanted to you asked why like we had you on even though you've been like very LCS
Hmm.
minded. One was because you were on the Spring for Proving Grounds, but also just because I know for you as someone who has been just a long standing enjoyer of multiple like regions and like the development side of it. Like I've been a big fan of you for like a very long time as well because of that sort of thing. Um, and I'm curious, what like what is it like to be super invested in like multiple multiple regions around the world, and like does that get easier like year to year, or does is it just like it's still like very difficult to do?
I mean, it's not difficult because it's not work. Like I joke around
Uh,
about not sleeping and having a terrible schedule, and like that's true.
So the coffee's for.
But I think yeah, exactly. So I'm incredibly addicted to coffee. The like I don't know how to explain it. Like last year for ESPN, I did so much stuff. Like this isn't like a humble brag or anything. Like I
mhm.
did so many pieces of content that when I didn't work because my contract wasn't up until like the end of January, beginning of February, but our vertical was cut, so I didn't have a place to write. And so they were like, you can't write anything about esports because it still technically belongs to ESPN, even though we don't have a place for you to publish it. So I couldn't cover like Scouting Grounds last year, which I was really upset about because Scouting Grounds has been something I've cared about since its inception, and I covered it.
That's back.
It's been I've been like super open about saying it's my favorite event to cover as a journalist for many reasons. But in terms of watching other regions, I did so many things with other esports that at the end, when I was just sitting around and I like couldn't do anything, I was like, I can't do this to myself again. But with League of Legends and watching like just a bunch of different league stuff around the world, it doesn't frequently feel like work. And that is probably not a satisfactory answer because again, I'm still like hunting my sleep schedule and I still have to navigate a lot of other things in terms of being an actual functioning human. But that's like the actual answer is that it just
Yeah.
doesn't really feel like work.
Why is that? I guess is the way to make this not
I
a
just really
satisfactory
love
answer.
it. That's the that is a blessing and a curse. Right?
So it's kind of interesting, like talking about Dev League so across the world, because there was some pretty big news that came out of China recently, with
Mm-hmm.
the government and limiting hours for gaming if you were under the age of 18. Um,
Mm-hmm.
that's gonna really change the scene over there. Actually, sadly enough, I know that it came out today that at least in the global contract database, that Cream, one of the best rookies that we had in
Yep.
the LPL, his contract wasn't renewed, which is a serious bummer. Um, and I'm kind of curious, like you were a part of the original Korean exodus to China. Like, do you think we actually
Mm-hmm.
start to see like some of these talents kind of go to Korea because they can play at an earlier age?
That's what someone was suspecting that
Yeah.
LPL orgs might just set up subsidiaries in Korea so that their trainees can effectively train there until they're of age. I also think that so like in the past when these kind of laws have passed, there's initial restructuring period where everyone tries to figure out how they're going to still develop talent with this law and previous iterations of it that were almost equally strict. It was you were able to find exceptions for young LPL talents. I don't
Mhm.
know if that will be the case this time, but I do think, for example, the removal of Cream from the OMG LPL
It's a bummer.
roster is an adjustment in response to that, right? Because
Yeah.
they can't legally have him on the team because he's not 18.
He's really
Fortunately for
good
them,
too.
I think he turns 18 like sometime this year, so it's not there probably won't be that long of a waiting period for him specifically.
Yeah.
But it basically effectively means that as of right now, until they figure out how they're going to navigate this law, that you cannot have anyone under 18 on your official starting roster for an LPL team. And so how that could affect things is that you can't be officially listed as like a trainee or on an LDL team because it's illegal. So that's going to be like the primary difference. Like, I don't think it's going to make a difference in terms of like, I hate to say it, but like kids have always found a way around this before, even to like get into internet cafes, even though you're technically supposed to be 18 and most of them, like, you know what I mean? Like, it wasn't like young players weren't getting around this before, and like I guess they would probably, I would assume, use their parents' QQ account. So as long as you don't have any sort of like facial or vocal recognition, you're not going to be able to tell that it's not your mom, it's you playing League of Legends at whatever time you want. So
I saw a fun like tweet that was like, wow, suddenly a huge spike in 40 to 6-year-old men on the League of Legends server.
You think like fake IDs?
A lot of dads sure are getting into League of Legends. Yeah. I mean, this is something that comes from like parents and teachers constantly complaining that gaming is like ruining everything. And that's where the previous law came from. So I am like concerned, but not like, oh my gosh, everything is going to be lit on fire. The only thing that would really concern me is if and like, speaking of like developmental talent, a lot of the multifaceted problem of like, why does NA suck? Why do we not have investment in native talent, which I think has changed rapidly, thank God, over this past year, from like all levels, right? From like, I know you guys have talked about like getting better coverage, like just getting shit on air, having people to cast it and be around and like literally get eyeballs on it. Like, it's never been easier for me as someone who is just interested in people coming up to go out there and look and be like, oh, okay, these are the top prospects. Like, I can literally watch this tournament that starts tomorrow, and it's awesome. I get to see all of these like amateur talents that are coming up the pipeline. Like with China, when they initially did that exodus, it actually like they didn't scout a lot of those players. Like, they just brought them over.
Yeah.
Without scouting, without paying attention to like what kind of player they were on the Rift, never mind what kind of player they were off the Rift. And it took a while until about, most people cite 2017 Rift Rivals, I believe. Whichever year China won Rift Rivals, which I believe was 2017 Rift Rivals, where they were like, wait, we can actually work together and like try to like not troll each other in scrims.
Yeah.
And like try to start
I remember that
working together.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was like literally they have a picture of all of the coaches just meeting under a street lamp at like 2 a.m. Like, what if we didn't troll each other in scrims? Like, what if we don't try to undermine each other? And it led to this revamping of like looking at native Chinese talent and how they fit, and how players from South Korea actually fit in terms of their play style. And all of a sudden, scouting and communication went significantly up. And so like China has been through this before, where at certain points before they really, really started to invest in their own talent again, it looked like a lot of the global interregional movement policy laws were actually aimed so there wouldn't be full all South Korean teams in China. Like, it literally had nothing to do. Like, I know when the initial update came through in like 2016, people were like, this is an anti-C9 law. And I'm like, no, it's against literally every Chinese team that's going to try to have all 5 of their players as South Korean players. And so when you've already seen that, like, kind of like just the lack of scouting and the lack of attention paid to scouting, especially in your own players, kind of ravage your region it took them years to figure out. I'm hoping that this is the year that NA is like figuring it out. And I'm also hoping that this law doesn't kick China back to that time, because I feel like we've had so many amazing young Chinese talents come up the pipeline. And then you also have people like Joinby and Rookie, who I consider to be LPL players. Like, I don't consider them LPL players, LCK players. I consider them LPL players, despite the fact that Rookie did have the one season where he won OGN. Yeah. And but Joinby and like the Shy have spent their entire pro careers in China.
Oh, it'd be like talking about Hui, like in NA,
yep.
right? Like that's the exact equivalent. But it's actually like kind of funny, like hearing you like talk about that, like all the development like around China, because like you think of like some of the players that have actually come through LDL. I mean, I believe Huangfang would be one that like came up like through their systems. Kareem's like the modern day example for me. I'm really excited about Kareem as a mid laner. I think he's like actually got a lot of talent.
Yeah, he's insane. He's actually insane.
But like it's kind of interesting like hearing about like all these like trainee programs. I mean, even thinking like to Korea with like Huni would be like the great example of like coming out of like the Samsung house like as a trainee. And like the story of like how all these players get started, and hopefully like that rule doesn't affect that, because that would be really unfortunate. Because there have been a lot of successful players that have come up. I think it's been very good for their lives and with all the money you make over in LPL. So hopefully, hopefully that keeps up still.
Yeah, I think that's where it's not going to be in like, I think kids will always find a way to play in internet cafes. That won't be the issue. It'll be these organizations can't legally have anyone under 18 on their official rosters.
Well, I'm gonna take a sharp left turn here, if you guys don't mind.
Go for it.
As we're about at an hour, I believe. For you, Emily, as we said before, this has been your first year on the LCS broadcast as an analyst desk member. What does next year and your goals in your future for broadcast look like? Do you want to keep doing what you're doing now? Do you want to get into like color casting perhaps? And what does that look like for 2022 and beyond?
Do we get written Emily content for Worlds?
Maybe I'll just write some stuff on my own. I still have that score article that's like half finished that I just haven't finished. I've written like 2,000 words of it, and it's only half finished.
Did you see him on the LCK broadcast, like the game show they had?
Yeah.
Oh, that was so fun.
It was very cute.
Yeah.
He looks so good too. It's hilarious how people, like,
I just love how he had like the cargo shorts. It was like, oh man. Yeah.
He's a funny guy. I don't know in terms of like whether the broadcast will want me back, obviously. That's a conversation that I'll have to have in the off season. I would like to continue. This didn't even start off as something that I thought I could do, so it's kind of hilarious. But I think that for me, just based on making myself more of like a valuable commodity, I would like to try to have a foray into color casting. The problem is that I actually did try it for a little while, all the way back in the beginning of 2015, like 2014, 2015 off season. We were going to do, me and a friend of mine were going to do a CB LOL in English broadcast, and we got shut down the first day that we tried it because Riot at that point was like cracking down on all of the English broadcasts because they just bought the LPL EN broadcast that like Kelsey and Frosk and Raz were all a part of, and they were doing all of the English casting for the LPL from out of the Sydney studio, I believe, the old Osh headquarters, right? We used to be in Sydney, right? I'm not getting the city wrong.
Don't ask me.
And and I was really fucking bad is the point. I was really, really bad. I over-focused on stuff like warding patterns and like jungle pathing. And so I would have to have a significant improvement. But maybe I'll just start casting over things and see how that goes. Like things I haven't seen.
Do it.
Because it would.
What I'm hearing is play-by-play is what you're gonna get into.
So I actually
I can talk really fast at times. So.
I made Smacks do
Yeah.
play-by-play for me here and there. We
That's
got paired
true.
up like on an event, and we like both looked at each other, and Sam's like, "It's probably best if I do this." I was like, "Please."
That is, it's paid off since then. I'm doing play-by-play for Wild Rift now. Sometimes, usually still color, but it's paid off. We
There we go. I'm
making a long-term investment. You know,
I was Smacks'
It's not
guinea
the
pig.
worst.
Let's go.
Yeah, exactly. Shout out to
Yeah,
shout
I
out
would
to
be
Kyle.
way too meandering.
That's
to do
typically my problem.
play-by-play.
That's typically where I
That's
get
half the
into
fun,
some
though.
trouble. It is pretty fun to just
They'd be like,
shout
Emily,
things.
there's action. Yeah, there's action over here, and I'm like focusing on like this minion wave topside or something.
Yeah.
Like, stop.
It's even more pronounced in Wild Rift. I really have a lot of work to do with it, but it's a fun time. But anyway, yeah, I think I speak for both Cubby and myself and a lot of our broadcast friends that we've talked to, and saying that like you and the new members of the LCS broadcast team have been so awesome. It has been an amazing year for like bringing in fresh faces and everything. The most recent one, of course, being Raz for the split, and actually Meteos as he's been doing the next level stuff, which has been really cool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Will is great
Loved it.
for that show. He's awesome.
Yeah, it's so good. Next level has been one of my favorite things that has like come out of like LCS content in a very long time. I really enjoy that. But yeah, it's been a pleasure listening to you and the new people that have been brought on for all of that. I wish that Alorum was back on summer. I don't know what his
Same.
plans were.
Him and his cat, man. They just got to keep on competing.
Also, I'm always rooting for Zeus just because I always want to root for Alarum. He is awesome to work with on the desk.
Yeah.
He's so funny, actually.
He is super funny.
And also the two of us work really well together because I typically am
agree.
looking at like jungle or mid jungle, and he's always looking at top side. And so whenever we were on a cast together, we would just naturally end up working really well together. So he's great.
Have you seen any of his content made around zoos and their match results involving MS Paint and bullying Raheen?
Yes.
Okay. Good. Yeah, those are some of my favorites.
At first, I was like, "What the fuck is this?"
Well, a couple episodes back, we had Raheen on the show, so of course, like we had to ask Raheen about it, right? And Raheen's like, "Yeah, it's like it started off as like bullying." And then, I was like, I'm just like gonna lean into it. It's like it's all in good fun.
Very funny.
So he just draws.
He is.
Yeah, he just bullies Raheen.
I was just gonna say he's the LWX of the team, right? Because do you guys know about that whole thing with FPX and they bully LWX, and we're just like, well, at least he has his like 50 billion dumpster cats that he feeds behind the FPX building.
Oh man,
Yep, that's Raheen.
That's. All right, I'm. That's like honestly, of like all like the VODs like teams like over for Proving Grounds, not important. But the fact you know that's very. You're good. You're good to go.
You're ready.
That's all you need.
Well, good.
Oh
Well, Emily, it's been an absolute pleasure talking with you on the show. So glad that you got to come on. I know this has been like your off week, as you said, but really glad that we found you in that off week. Do you have any closing thoughts or any like shout outs or any places that we can find you?
You can find me on Twitter at League of Emily. I've been getting a lot more engagement with my tweets, which is kind of terrifying, but
the peanut tweet was awesome.
Not in a bad way, just terrifying. But then I mean that's the only place for now. If I don't end up getting tapped to do Worlds, I'll probably be doing something around Worlds in terms of writing. I probably will return to writing, just because it's my thing and I actually really miss it. So I guess just look out for something. I'm sure I'll hopefully be able to find a place to write.
Well, we've got your Twitter on the screen, and fingers crossed you end up doing both. And thanks for joining us today. It was really fun having you and picking your brain. And yeah, excited for Worlds and Proving Grounds coming up.
Thank you for having me. I'm sorry I didn't have as much time to prep for this as I would have liked.
Oh no, I think talking about like
prepared.
the conclusion of NA and like going into Worlds, perfect. Because it was a really interesting split, and hey, we get the 5th organization to hang a banner up in LCS. That's pretty cool.
Yeah. And we're always trying to cater things around our guests. So if anything, it's on us for not doing that. So apologies, but we're really
think
glad
we're
we
all
got
right,
to.
Snacks.
get
We're
to have
okay.
you. Yeah,
I just got some
Yeah, you're
coffee
fine.
grounds,
It's been a
so
pretty good episode.
good
you know?
timing.
Oh, unlucky. That's the worst.
Well, anyway, if you're still listening right now, thank you so much for tuning in. This has been episode 32 of the Proving Grounds pod. It's a big number. We did a lot of these this
Not
year.
bad.
This has
Yeah.
been pretty
Congratulations.
fun. Thank you.
It's been
Yeah,
fun.
it's been a fun year for all this, and we're finally here with the last Proving Grounds of the entire year. Well, I don't actually know what we're gonna do after Proving Grounds is done. I don't know if we'll have any like wrap up episodes or something.
we'll figure it
but
out.
We will figure it out. But yeah, thanks again for tuning in. You can find us on Twitter at pgroundspod for a bunch of updates and everything of that nature. We got all of our audio platforms you can listen into the show. We got YouTube, Twitch, Spotify, Apple, Google, and Anchor. Check us out on all of those, and we also have our Discord where we're posting updates sometimes whenever I remember to ping everyone there. So you can check us out there, and please tune in to Proving Grounds this week. Round 1 is starting. We're getting all of the amateur versus academy action, and it's going to be a great time. And